back to Lemonade Customs on our Cummins engine overhaul. At this point in time with this disassembly process, we're pretty much at a point where you could actually do all this stuff with the engine still inside the truck. So say you have your head off, your injection pump is off and being sent away to a pump shop to have them go through it or max it out, and you decide, you know what, I want to put a cam, but I'm scared to drop my lifters into the oil pan, and I don't have any wooden dowels because I just don't have them because I'm cheap like Austin. So what you want to do is there is a side cover on the side of this engine, which is also your breather for the engine here. Is you want to remove this cover, and then we'll get access to all of our lifters. Tech tip time. So you want to take a zip tie and a magnet. It's a little more difficult in the truck, but doable. There, lifter will not fall now. So the camshaft has some signs of wear, but it's actually in really good shape and is definitely reusable. But measuring will tell us for sure, but with my gut, I would say it's reusable. So when storing a camshaft, you don't want to lay it on its side. You want to store it straight up and down. Usually what we do at the shop here is we'll wrap it up in some rags, and then we'll zip tie it to a leg of a workbench. That way it's out of the way, it's held securely so it can't fall over, and it's straight up and down to prevent any deformation of the camshaft. Now we're going to start just stripping off some of this random junk that's on the side of this engine here. Austin, I got you a nice water pump here. It's real pretty, real mint.
Yep, definitely can't afford it.
Got a little bit of cleaning to do. Majority of your time cleaning. Spent all of our money on diesel parts, so I couldn't afford to buy the finer things in life like an oil drain pan. And this oil pan here, we were gonna keep it and reuse it, but it's just not gonna quite pan out. Okay, so you're now at the stage where you got your oil pan off and you're ready to just start hitting those pistons out. Well, you don't want to just start doing that just quite yet, because if you look here on your bore of your cylinder walls here, there's a bunch of carbon built up here. So if you go to just try and smack your pistons out, your rings are going to hit this carbon buildup, and you're going to have to just keep hammering and hammering, and you could do some damage to your piston skirt. And so in order to alleviate that is take the time to just go around each one with a razor blade or a little X-Acto knife and just scrape off all the carbon ridge so that when it comes time to remove your pistons, they slide right out. Alrighty, so we finally reached the end goal of this engine disassembly, and we've made it to our rotating assembly, And now it's time to start removing the pistons and connecting rods, and then follow that by removing the crankshaft main caps and then eventually the crankshaft itself. So before we start any kind of disassembly here, we kind of want to make sure that we have our main caps and our rods and pistons marked out on which order they are in, because they are all mated to each other. So if you look here closely on the Cummins, they kind of do it for you, and all the way along they've numbered your main caps, so it's pretty simple to remember which ones no marking is necessary. When it comes to doing the rods and piston combination, I personally like to take metal stamps and stamp the cap on each rod. You don't have to wail away on it. You kind of just put the stamp on there and give her a little tap just to make enough of an indentation that you see the numbers. That way, for reassembly purposes, there's no chances of me getting something wrong. And if you just use paint marker, it'll just wash away. If you don't have stamps, I've seen people use center punching to just center punch one mark on the number 1, 2 on number 2, and so forth. So yeah, let's get started. We got the number 1 rod cap off. Looking at the rod bearing here, some light signs of wear, some embedding of material, which is really normal. Overall, in pretty good shape. No deep grooves, no heavy discoloration. I would say that this main bearing, and really this whole engine, would probably have been runnable as is, but for my project, I just kind of want to have a rebuilt engine in it, so that's why we're going through all this. So we have the piston out now. No broken rings. Some carboning built up on the oil ring, but that could have just been from removal. But overall, in good shape. I would feel pretty confident about reusing these pistons after measuring them up and putting new piston rings on them. The engine had no signs of dusting, so yeah, pretty happy so far with this teardown of this engine. Alrighty, so we have the pistons out of this engine now, and we are going to be starting on removal of the crank here right away. But now we need to get the gear case off the engine, which is as simple as just undoing a couple of bolts on the front side here and tapping it off, and removal of our rear seal housing here, and then we can rotate the engine back over and we'll start on doing the main caps. Now ready to remove the main caps for the crankshaft. So like stated earlier with the cylinder head, the same principle applies here. You want to start disassembly in the same fashion that you torqued the crank in. On this engine, you start from the center and work your way out. You don't want to start from one end and work your way down, because as you're loosening it off, your crankshaft could flex. So we will begin. I usually start on this side, and I usually use just a normal ratchet to loosen off the bolts.
Yep.
So now that I have the bolts all loosened, in order to remove the main cap, you have two little handles here. So you leave your bolts in, and you simply just use the bolts to wiggle it back and forth until it releases it, and there you go. Inspection of the main bearing. A slight mark here. The crankshaft looks not to be damaged at all. Very light embedding. It's in decent shape. This engine looks like it hasn't really lived a very long life. Okay, so now we have the crank out. The engine is pretty much disassembled to as far as I'm going to take it for now. The block needs to be cleaned up. A lot of components need to be measured for reassembly and to see if I can still use standard size pistons and bearings. That's really tedious work, and it'll take me a while to get through all of that. But if you come over here to look, on each one of these, your main bearing section here, your crank girdle, there is a piston cooling nozzle. Well, on number 1 here, it appears to be missing. Luckily, there doesn't look to be any kind of scoring on the cylinder. I don't know if it's just plastic, so I don't know if I accidentally tapped it with on the removal of my pistons and rods. But if it was missing from before, I definitely am happy that I disassembled this engine, because without the piston getting proper oiling, it could definitely lead to premature engine failure, and so now I will have to order up a set of piston cooling nozzles. So thank you for stopping by and watching another video on the disassembly of this engine in our 5.9 build. I would like to tell you guys that the next video will be documenting the kind of part selection that I have bought and will be installing into this engine and detailing some of the things that we're doing with this build. And like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. Thank you.